Hello, I'm Dr. Daria Brzezinski, and you're watching What Wise Women Want here on Charlottesville's Public Access, Comcast Channel 13. Every week we have panels of women, experts and women from the community who talk about issues that pertain to families and many, many other things. We want to inform you and help you make informed choices. Ladies, we are 52% of the population, with 85% of the purchasing power. What better way to use that purchasing power than by making informed choices that transform your life, your family's life, and the life of your community? Every week, you can visit us and go to our website at www.whatwisewomenwant.com, and Wize is spelled with a Z. There you will find the programs that are shown every week. We tape ahead so that if you have questions for future broadcasts, you can email us at our website, www.whatwisewomenwant.com. Today's panel is Uplifting a Nation Out of Spiritual Bankruptcy. Now, I chose that title because, in my estimation, something is happening to the spirituality in our community, and that's what we'd like to talk about in our nation as a whole. So today we have 4 very special spiritual leaders from 4 different faiths. To my right is Melanie Miller. She is pastor of Sojourners United Church of Christ. To her right is Kevyn Byrne, who is from the Baha'i faith. To her right is Alex McGee of the Unitarian Universalist Church, and she is a ministerial associate. And to her right is Heena Reiter of the Jewish Renewal Community of Charlottesville and also Interfaith Cooperation Circle. Hello, ladies.
Hello.
Hi. So first of all, some of you have faiths that aren't necessarily well known to people, local as well as national. So let's talk a little bit about each one of your faiths and kind of give us a bit of a brief summary. So would you like to start, Melanie?
Certainly.
Tell us about Sojourners.
Sojourners belongs to a denomination called the United Church of Christ. And the United Church of Christ was established in 1957. It was a joining together of 4 different denominations. And I'm very proud of my denomination. We've always been about making the circle bigger rather than closing it off. So the forebearers of my denomination were the first to ordain an African American, the first to ordain a woman, the first to ordain an openly gay person. So that's a heritage that we at Sojourners fully embrace. Sojourners is only about 20 years old, and some of their founding values, their core values, were that everyone would be welcome to worship in that space.
Very good. Kevyn, will you tell us a little bit about the Baha'i faith?
Yes, so the Baha'i faith is considered to be the most recent of the world religions. And we're just a wee bit over 150 years old, so we are quite new in terms of a faith. We are, however, the most widespread religion on our planet at this current time, having embraced peoples from all different countries and faiths who have become Baha'is. Our primary guiding principle is the unity of humankind, and under which then many of our other fundamental principles, such as the equality of men and women and basically the equality of science and religion, are just a few of the principles.
You also people can't go out and find your place because there's not.
In this particular community and in the community in which I live, yes, there is not a Baha'i center. There are temples around the world, and there are so-called congregations, or what we call communities, again, spread out throughout the world, easily found by Googling Baha'i, and you can find a community.
Thank you. All right, let's hear a little bit, Alex, about the Unitarian Church, the Universalist Church.
Right, so the Unitarian Universalist Church is based in a Christian heritage, and by the tenets of liberal religion, believes that we have the capacity to think critically and make sense of religion. And so we believe that many different world heritages, world faiths can inform us. And so people from lots of different backgrounds find a home in the Unitarian Universalist Church. Here in Charlottesville, we're on Rugby Road. And we are also well known for welcoming people who are living what we might call a liberal lifestyle. And by that I mean that they are not held in an orthodoxy which limits their whole well-being.
All right. Heena, tell us a little bit about the Jewish faith. Yours is probably the oldest in the room.
Yeah, I think so. That's true. It's so hard to talk about Judaism simply because it is so old and it has been around for so long, and there are so many different forms of Judaism. But there is no dogma. There is no single belief that all Jewish people hold. Judaism is in the hands of the people who live it. And in our community, we have a Jewish renewal community. We have a synagogue, Congregation Beth Israel. We have a Chabad house, which is Lubavitcher. And each one has a very different flavor. But what's important about Jewish renewal, which is what I'm mostly involved with, is that we're a lot like what you've been hearing here. There's a lot of openness, embracing of people who have different ways of wishing to practice Judaism and living their lives. I would say the three things that Judaism stands on, if we had to pick, pillars, it would be the oneness of the divine, the oneness of God, and the unity of people, which we call Yisrael, we call Israel, which means those who struggle to know God, and the teaching, what it is we learn, and that Torah, or teaching, is something that comes not only from texts, but from our lives. And so there's this quality of integration and holism that's very important in the Jewish renewal movement.
Well, you can see now why I invited the four of you, because you're very much, in alignment with each other in many ways, and very similar. So I'd like to start off the conversation, since this is about uplifting a nation of spiritual bankruptcy. We're talking about religion here, but what is spirituality in your estimation? Is there a difference between being religious and being spiritual? And what does that look like, and what is it? Anybody like to start? Melanie?
Well, you just said, I love the way that you put it, the struggle to know the divine, or to know God. Mm-hmm. And that's how I think of spirituality, everyone's personal journey to discover God, to discover the divine, to discover the sacred within their lives and around them. And I do think that there is a difference between spirituality and religion. Religion can be a path to discover the divine, to be in touch with the sacred, but it certainly is not the only way. And oftentimes, in speaking with people, I suspect sometimes that the dogmas that many religions force on people actually inhibit that journey to find the sacred in their lives.
Interesting.
I had an idea on my way here of an analogy. It's sort of like milk, right? Milk nourishes us. Spirituality nourishes us. But there's soy milk and cow's milk and rice milk and almond milk, and there's high-fat milk and low-fat milk and skim milk and lactate.
And half and half.
Right. So the idea being that, all the different religions are suited to different digestions. We need different versions of religion in order to feel comfortable.
But that the spiritual is
the nourishment.
Is the nourishment.
Yeah.
When I think of religion, I think of a vessel which holds us, and there's commitment in being in a religious community. It means showing up. It means serving. It means looking out for others. It means tending a shared space or a shared community and growing through the human discipline of commitment. And I think that calls on our spiritual nature and helps make us more spiritually mature.
Kevyn, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I see the spirituality as our relationship. That is how we understand God, how we experience God, how we have an active relationship with God. Our religions can give us the framework, the structure, the ability to understand. They certainly have given us throughout the ages the framework on which our societies are built. I just make the little bit of a differentiation in terms of the structures that are created by the various world religions. From a Baha'i perspective, however, there's religion with a capital R, which would suggest that all of the branches we have in terms of religion are actually one and the same, and that we, as people, we progress, we require more information about how our divine creator is working in our lives, our relationship, therefore, and this capital R religion then can embrace all of us, including our personal experiences, which is certainly a good deal different than religion is often played to be, which is why it's in such, seemingly in such bad straits.
Oh, thank you for segueing into that for me.
Such bad straits. So,
yes. Why then is religion on the decline? And, you know, it's funny because you mentioned in your definition of spirituality, showing up, service, other-oriented, personal experience, and those kinds of things. And I was wondering if you had a perspective. We know the statistics demonstrate that religion is on the decline in the United States and in the Western world in general. So what do you think attributes to the decline in religion?
I think it's in our diversity, and in the fact that in these days and times, you know, there was a time when people lived in their own communities. They didn't branch out. They didn't have the opportunity to learn from other peoples. Now, just as a function of all the chaos or our internet, we're crossing boundaries we never crossed before.
But don't you think that would bring people more together because the communities
from
are
the
going
Baha'i
apart?
perspective, that's exactly what's happening, is that ultimately we're moving there. But you have to have the chaos before you have the order.
Anyone else have a...
I think that to say religion is on the decline is a very small slice of a historical picture.
Okay.
And throughout thousands of years, there has been rise and fall in how people might report their religious affiliation. And in 2007, the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life did a survey, and they asked people to report religious affiliation. Well, what's been happening in the last few decades is that doubt has become more acceptable. And so it may have been that someone felt in their heart exactly the same way 100 years ago, but when asked how they religiously affiliate, they might have reported a religious affiliation even with the same level of doubt that they have today, and say that they're not religiously affiliated.
That's an interesting perspective.
I have another piece that I'd like to add, which is that I think because certain religious values are being, I don't know what word to use. It's a hard word to find. They're being like screamed, perhaps is the word I want to use, by a certain segment of society that in Israel, for example, and also here in Israel, you are either religious or secular. There's almost no in between because the religious expression is so strong and so extreme at one end. And to a certain extent, that's happening in this country as well. So if I say I'm a religious Jew when I'm in Israel, they immediately assume that that means that, well, obviously I can't be. My head's not covered. I'm wearing pants. In this country, to say you're religious almost sounds like you're saying, and I'm on the right wing of politics. They have just become glued. Religious right. You don't hear religious left.
That's true.
Or religious in the middle.
That's true.
So it's a little bit like, I'm not going to say I'm religious because that's been appropriated by some folks.
Interesting perspective.
I have a lot to say on this topic, so feel free to interrupt me.
No, go right ahead.
Stop. I've been serving churches, in January it'll be 20 years, and so I can only speak from my experience within the Christian faith and specifically within a mainline denomination. And congregational churches have seen an enormous amount of decline over the past 40, 50 years, and it's been devastating for many churches. Many churches are grieving now because they've seen decline in numbers, decline in their facilities, decline in their buildings, and it's a very, very difficult place for churches to be in. And oftentimes my response is unwelcomed, because I see many churches, not all, but many churches that are declining. I see that they've really become irrelevant within their communities. They've stopped talking about justice. Exactly. They've stopped talking about right relationship. They've really stopped addressing the needs of their community in ways that are meaningful. And so my response then is, well, if you're not engaging with your community, if you're not working with your community, if you're not working for justice, if you're not talking to people, then why are you here? Yes. And I think that oftentimes, if there's not a reason to be there, people won't show up.
Right.
They won't. And it's a very difficult, I think it's a very difficult conversation to have. And many UCC churches, many congregational churches are declining. I think we're beginning to see that now a little bit in evangelical churches. I think it's just starting there. And I do think over the next 20 and 30 years, evangelical churches will face the same kinds of problems. I think new generations are tired of having their religions so closely tied with politics. They're tired of being told what they should believe about specific things. Their dogma says, you
this is what you do.
And so I think that they're going to be facing many of the same issues.
Well, I know in my hometown where I was raised, we had a joke. There was a church and a bar on every corner. And within the last 15 years, almost every church has closed. Granted, part of it has to do with declining populations. It's in the state of Pennsylvania. But also it has to do with exactly what you said. The church never changed with the population. And as the older population died, nobody addressed the newer youth. And so it all declined and dropped off.
So then,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I want you to know that many emerging churches now within the UCC and other denominations are actually meeting in bars. They're saying, we're not going to invest any longer in bricks and mortar. We're investing in people, and therefore we'll meet in a space that's accessible to us. And many bars have opened their doors and said, we're not here on Sunday morning. Feel free to worship here.
Which is what the Baha'is do. What were you going to say,
I was going to say that the hope lies in the fact that we are creative and that we are flexible and we are diverse.
Absolutely.
And so I think that although surveys might be showing certain trends, I think that what we find in humanity and in community is people are doing these kinds of neat things.
So then none of you really talked about science and the fact that, we are in this scientific era where everything has to be rational and measured, and, the idea of the mystical, quote unquote, magical is given to Harry Potter and those kinds of things, and it's not in terms of a spiritual nature, in terms of your life. And so, so none of you see science as a part of
I don't see science as separate from.
Okay.
I see science as another way of describing the divine. It tries to understand and codify and say, yes, this exists, and yes, this is how it exists, and this is how it works, and isn't that a miracle?
But doesn't that take away the mystical?
Oh, no.
And the spiritual, the magical, the belief?
Oh, no, not to me. Because you have, this is a vast, God is vast. We're simply making the attempts to understand. That's our role here, at least from the Baha'i perspective. We're here to understand and know God as best we can. So we approach that through our spiritual lives, our experiences, our writings in all of these precious faiths. The writings are incredible, and that informs us in a certain way. Now we have the ability, because people are advancing, because we have the abilities we didn't previously have, to start to try to understand things through the scientific lens. But these are simply the same. All together, they are the same.
So the notion of the God particle doesn't offend anybody.
I love the idea.
The God
It
particle
was the first
exists.
time my husband actually
I'm glad you are.
It was the first time my husband actually could manage the idea of God.
Really?
Yeah, because it was a scientific explanation for something that, that it holds everything together. That's awesome. It's totally awesome. Now, in the Jewish world, there's two trends. One trend is that science, medicine, we incorporate it into our life and make use of it. And the other trend is there was a whole period of time, especially when the first Enlightenment or revolution was happening, or whatever it's referred to, and everything became very rational. The spiritual side of Judaism was buried, absolutely buried, for lots of reasons. And there had to be a rebirth, and there was a rebirth in the 1800s with the Baal Shem Tov, who was a tzaddik, a wise man, a saint, and a miracle worker. And he brought back joy and celebration and love and connection to God for the simple people. You don't need to be able to, study Talmud and be an expert in all the laws of Judaism to love God. And in fact, Jewish renewal is often considered to be in the lineage of the Baal Shem Tov for that reason. But both movements are here. And in Judaism, I think for those people who are very mainstream in it, I believe that they are actually suffering from a lack of a relationship. Mm-hmm. Talking about a relationship with God is very difficult in some communities.
So, I was just thinking about, as you were talking, I was thinking about the history of Christianity and Catholicism in particular, in how it was constantly, we talked about this earlier, wrapped up in the political of the time. I'm paying, alms in order to get God's graces, and all the Crusades and the Inquisition and all the other kinds of things. That it seems to me that religion and spirituality and politics and the social realm and the social order all get integrated and mixed up with each other to the point where sometimes we can't tell differentiate between them. Mm-hmm. And that's why maybe it's turning some people off, because
right.
Well, back to the topic of science, I think one of the things that has been a problem more recently, probably in the last 100 years, is a literal reading of the Bible. And so right there you set up Christianity against science. And I think that's such a tragic thing that has happened. And I love Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan. They're two Christian theologians, and they really push back against a literal reading of the Bible, and they promote what they call a more than literal reading, so that it's metaphor and it's poetry and it's all of these wonderful things, so that you're not set up right away to push back against science or any other thing, or to be engaged in politics in a way that you need to force your belief system on someone else.
Well, one of the things that, I had a hard struggle myself, especially during college and after college with religion. And I was the organist in the church. I was youth minister and all those kinds of things. And one of the things that really, there were a couple of things, but one of them was, it seemed to me that the Catholic Church was constantly trying to program go to the poor and the ignorant, because that was the place where you could get. And I look at it today, and where is the Catholic Church thriving? But with the poor countries, third world countries, and that kind of thing. And so, I, as an intelligent person, what I did was I started studying the history of the Bible. And when I did, I went, there's no way I can take this literally, if you know the history and how it came about and how, as it came. Just the idea that I know translations, translating it from the original to, Hebrew, and all the, as you come down along the line, anything that's been translated even once loses its, authenticity. So how can you help people in using, scriptures? And I know there's in the Baha'i faith, they're in the Christian faith, they're in the Jewish faith. How can you help people to use the scripture, whatever that is in your faith, not as dogma, but as something else, in order to be able to enhance your spiritual life? What would you say? Anybody?
Well, in the Baha'i faith, we have as one of our principles the independent investigation of truth. It's one of the reasons we do not have ministers, because it's believed that people have advanced to a place where they can read these writings and discern for themselves the deepest of meanings from them. So it's really more about directing people to them, helping folks, if need be, to discuss the deeper meanings of these writings. I know for myself, as I read the writings, there's a constancy of new exploration through them. I couldn't possibly read even the smallest of phrases and say that I get it now. I think it's very important that we're referring folks directly to these scriptures. Yet, it's the dogma and the politicizing of our religions and the materialism that we're all undergoing in this particular culture that distorts what these writings actually have to offer. We would, in conversation with atheists, for instance, they would say, well, how can you possibly believe something that, in my worldview, the people just haven't had the opportunity to see them through their own eyes. They hear them in church, and, I was an Episcopalian, and the liturgy is very set. Frankly, you only get certain parts of the Bible in a cycle. When you start reading off the text, so to speak, oh, wow, look at that. Oh, my gosh, now that really speaks to me. Because, again, this is about our relationship. This is our access point. The only way we have really to know our Creator is through our various manifestations of God on this earth. Whether that was Moses, or whether that was Abraham, or Buddha, or in my faith, Baha'u'llah, these manifestations of God are where we can start our relationship. And so ultimately, their fine words are the thing that can literally speak to us. And we're all capable of hearing that. There was a time, you mentioned the Catholic Church, well, the poor and the ignorant, they couldn't read that. Right. That we didn't have translations.
Which is why that they were, sort of targeted.
Exactly. They went to church for the
Catholics
ritual.
aren't encouraged to read the Bible at all.
No?
At all.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
My first time reading it was in college.
I agree with what you're saying about relational, and I think that meaningful scriptural study occurs when people sit in a group and in community listen to each other's stories as they relate to the story, the wisdom that they're reading together, and also looking at what was the community for whom the scripture was intended.
Yes.
So doing enough
important.
study to know who was the Sangha or the community that the Buddha was speaking to, or when Jesus was speaking, why were those particular people gathered on that day in that place, and what intent did he have in the message that he was giving in that parable?
So that would take an in-depth kind of understanding. But you alluded to something which is kind of something that I talk about all the time whenever I talk, and that is the manifestation of God. And before we get into it, I'd like to say that you are watching What Wise Women Want here on Charlottesville's public access Comcast Channel 13. Our topic today is Uplifting a Nation Out of Spiritual Bankruptcy. Our guest today, to my right, is Melanie Miller, pastor of Sojourners United Church of Christ. To her right is Kevyn Byrne of the Baha'i Faith. To her right is Alex McGee, the Unitarian Universalist Church Ministerial Associate. And to her right is Heena Reiter, the Jewish Renewal Community of Charlottesville and the Interfaith Cooperation Circle. I had to do that before we got into this one. So, why is it that all the major religions, this is something that's one of my bailiwicks, all began by men, and all the intermediaries have, up until the present moment, been all men? How can women relate to religion when supposedly every religion was founded by a man? And how come we don't attribute it to a woman?
I just have to say that it's interesting in Judaism that Judaism happened in the desert. The covenant happened. We know something happened. We don't know really what happened. We know what the Bible says, but historians say something happened. And it happened to an entire group of people at the same time. Men, women, and children were all present at this revelation, whatever it was. That's kind of interesting to me. There was a leader of this group, which was Moses, and his sister Miriam played an incredibly important role. So what we need to do is tell people the stories that they don't necessarily know because they didn't make it into the movies or common culture or whatever. But for example, it was Miriam who said to her parents, when the Pharaoh ruled that the baby boys, infant boys, would be killed, the husbands and wives all began to live separately from each other. Miriam was a prophet, and she knew that they were supposed to have a son who was going to do something special, and she played a role in making sure the family stayed together. She said, "You're making it impossible to even have girl children." So we need to learn these stories that women played very key roles sometimes. It's very behind the scenes. And I think one of the nice things that's one of the useful ways to bring people in is through story and legend. And these are teachings. They may not be of the same stature as text, but text is also, we believe, created by somebody. So I think story and finding out, learning, finding people who know these things, looking them up on the internet, powerful women. I can't wait to hear about what the women are doing in these other traditions.
So women, that's been one of my kind of bailiwicks in terms of religion, and why I think, women were the people who went to church and who, mostly participated in these spiritual endeavors, and yet, they were not given credit, or, as we come down the line with stories, all of a sudden we have this huge patriarchy everywhere in all, religions. And so I think that's part of the problem, because we are the more spiritual, in nature, and we can't associate with all these things that are male-dominated kinds of issues, because they don't deal with feminine kinds of issues.
I guess I'd like to challenge that. I'm not sure that either men or women or anyone who claims any kind of gender identity, even transgender or in between, is more or less spiritual than another gender identity. And I think it's true that there has been a patriarchal history, and that has spanned across politics and religion and business. But as Heena said, we know that women have stories within that history. There is a herstory within the history.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's the same kind of distortion that exists, presuming that God does not. That our materialistic world, our secular viewpoints are more important and more valid. It is one of the reasons I became a Baha'i. It's because of fundamental. It's in the writings. It speaks of the equality of men and women, and part of that is also about uplifting women into actual participation in the world. And that through our writings, it actually says that until that happens, we will not progress as a society. We simply cannot. Until women are not necessarily in the positions of power, but in the positions of recognition and side-by-side action. And in fact, it uplifts, from my perspective, it uplifts the role of the household woman, the woman who is raising the children. That is an incredibly important role that we've negated by, again, a distortion of feminism as well, in my perspective. But in my faith, the fact that women are on an equal par, that at the highest level, well, not the very highest level, but at the almost highest level.
I was going to get you on.
I know you were. Of
Soon to be.
yes, of our, our, I guess, groups, because we do things in groups. There are women, so for me, I also. In our faith, our highest body is called the Universal House of Justice, and it is all men. And I had a great deal of difficulty with that, trying to accept my faith, and I just couldn't get it. But what ended up happening is I had a chance to go to Haifa, Israel, and actually meet the Universal House of Justice. And when I did so, what I found was that I was meeting with people who are so well balanced in their male-femaleness, as actually I think all of us are being called to in this day, that the concerns dropped away. If this is my leadership for my faith, I don't have to worry about the fact that there isn't a woman sitting there.
Well,
I feel
wonder,
well represented.
I wondered when we look at the youth of today, and the way that youth are being raised, especially in front of the computer and the television, and the kind of messages that are being given to our children. And, it's all about materialism. I mean, we've gotten to the point where we don't even have, we don't celebrate anything that isn't surrounded by either food that's ridiculous in the amount of it and the content, whether it's sugar, fats, and all those things, or the fact that, it's all about exchanging expensive gifts or, purchasing gifts. And, this is why I'm talking about spiritual bankruptcy, because I feel like our children are not being raised in an environment that encourages their spirituality, that supports their spirituality, but rather encourages their materialism. Melanie?
Well, I loved what you said, Alex, very early on about community and about finding the sacred within community. And I think that's such an important point. So much of where we meet God, how we meet God, is in relationship. And Natalie Boltz-Weber, who's a Lutheran pastor, recently said, pretty much anybody can go to a beautiful nature setting on top of a mountain and feel God's presence with the majesty and the mystery around. But she said, it's in that sticky relationship that I really have to work, where I find God, where I have to think about, okay, what did I say? How did I say it? Did I listen?
Yes.
That's where she says she profoundly meets the sacred and the divine. And I wonder if, because kids spend so much time with technology, if maybe it's the relational piece that's missing. I also think that there are other reasons. Within mainline denominations, I think we lose our kids. We lose them to soccer. We lose them to overscheduling. We lose them to all kinds of things. But I would argue that we never really had them. So often within a worship service in a Christian church, the kids go downstairs for Sunday school.
Yes.
And they don't hear the stories. They don't participate in the liturgy. So of course, when they're 13 and they're expected to sit in church, it's incredibly foreign to them. It's incredibly uncomfortable. And to expect that overnight they'll find that environment welcoming and engaging, I think, is unrealistic.
Magical participation, yeah.
I'd like to lift up, in the Unitarian Universalist history, part of the theology is that educating the child is essential to serving God, and that every creature that comes into being has a God seed inside of them, and it is the obligation of the community to bring that forth in the way that is right for that child. And so in the Unitarian Universalist Church, we have a lot of success stories of kids who are figuring out who they are and how they can thrive in the world with the support of the community. And I see that in lots of different faith communities. And I'm actually really excited about how kids who might be numbed by technology are saved from that. by whatever faith they are part of.
And I think it's, the notion that, the technology is the relationship rather than, I've been called into family homes because the parents say, we're not communicating with each other. Will you help us? And I'll sit there and observe, and they're sitting around the dining room table and everybody's texting. And I say, this is common sense. How can you possibly communicate with each other if you're all talking to your technology? Or, I have families who I say, your bedroom is sacred. There's no technology in it. And you think I was, taking away their teeth. So, we've become addicted to technology to the point where it's an addiction, really. And we lose sight of those relationships, and all of a sudden, 40 characters becomes our relationship with people, really?
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we're doing in our faith community, and I know other faith communities that do this, is have classes that support parents in dealing with those kinds of issues at home. Mm-hmm. And also have weekend events and evening events so that mom, dad, both moms, both dads, grandma, grandpa can all come together and be with the kids. And that intergenerational time together is uplifting for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How do you think morals and values come into play in terms of spirituality?
I think it's
and religion?
absolutely the thing that is at most at risk right now. If you look through our culture and the despair, it seems to be born out of the loss of values and of basic morality, which is where religion at its finest was present. Religions have assisted us throughout the eons to form communities, to even know what is healthy, to have decent relationships. At this point in time, though, as we separate ourselves from our religions, we separate ourselves from our values. You can look in our culture and see this. You go to a store and you don't have eye contact and a relationship. It used to be you could go to a store and they'd help you find the silly little tiny thing that might cost 25 cents, but they're going to be there for you to the end. And we don't say thank you. We don't, and yet I start to see, a little bit of a change in tide with that. But I think the values are an absolute component. When in my very difficult job, am working with the adolescent boys who have come out of just horrendous circumstance. It's almost impossible for them to be good citizens at this point. Over and over again, whether it be the abusive mother and father or whether it be the abandonment, it's a loss of value. The boys don't know the virtue of thankfulness. They don't know the virtue of consideration or commitment, that fine word. They don't know what this means. And this is where we, I believe, need to be engaging with youth from the very smallest.
And I think that's part of the problem, because we separate mothers from their children at a very young age, put them into preschools and daycares, and have the expectation that they're going to learn these, somehow osmosis, learn these morals and values from the group of 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, instead of being guided by parents or religious or in those areas. How does I think morals and values are really the fundamentals of a society, in my estimation. If we don't have respect for each other, if we don't have boundaries, one of the most significant things I see in my practice is people don't have boundary issues. They don't know what's appropriate and what's not appropriate behavior. They don't have common sense.
Exactly.
And even to the idea of writing a thank you note is foreign to, how many children get Christmas presents and write a thank you note to whoever gives them a present? It's like non-existent in our culture these days. And gratitude is really what it's all about. And so, how can we help these children? You all represent religious, and I would say many more of the people are more non-religious and more atheist. Children being grown up because they have nothing. They have no, foundation. What can we do to help, children develop those morals and values when they don't get in their religion?
The first thought that came to my mind is we can pray. Honest to God.
Yeah,
That was
sure
my
can.
thought. I mean, it seems to me that the problem is so huge right now because it's not just like here. The whole way many things in our governmental and corporate, especially, structure is dehumanizing, taking away relationship. And so I personally feel that conversations like this one and making commitments to those organizations that are seeking to build, there's an organization called Tikkun. Tikkun means to repair. Tikkun is really trying to get corporations to change their structure so that the bottom line is whether or not it serves people.
Yes.
The bottom line is not the profit. The bottom line is this serving people? To begin to think that way and to expect people to think that way, for us, for each of us, to expect not that we have to adapt to the way the corporate structures are working, but rather that we say, wait, just a minute. Can this be different? When I talk with a person who's on the phone, who's engaging in some kind of transaction with me, right? If they start doing that like corporate thing, I feel a very strong need to say, hi, person here, person there, let's just talk to each other. To try to strengthen that. That might be a bit abstract, but I think that that's a part of it, is really holding ourselves to a standard of expectation that we can't just let everything go down toward materialism. We just can't. We need to say it, and we need to pray for it, and we need to support the idea that we're human beings on this planet, on this beautiful planet. We're human beings here, and we deserve to be able to live human lives with each other, and to not let go of that, to not become helpless or hopeless or see ourselves as powerless in the face of very powerful organizations and structures. We need to keep the hope alive, I guess, or whatever that is.
And with those people who are, following that bliss of monetary freedom or independence or, building a business or a corporation and all those things. And I mean, for the most part, most of their children are the ones who are suffering from this being driven, in this materialistic world. And so, oftentimes the children are left out from the conversation even, or whatever is happening in the family life. And so I wondered, where do you see religion going? I mean, we talked about various types of things, but do you think that, I know the idea of spirituality is talked about all the time, whether it's Oprah on the television or, spirituality seems to be a conversation as well as a lucrative business, in terms of self-help books and all that kind of thing, which are predominantly filling the gap for not having spirituality. Again, religion. Materialism. Yes, religion. And so where do you think religion is going?
I'm actually filled with hope.
Yes,
I think that there are really exciting things happening. I mentioned the emerging church earlier. The ways that people are journeying with one another and inviting people into this relationship with God are really exciting, and not investing in bricks and mortar, but investing in people, really working for justice. There are some absolutely wonderful things happening, and I am absolutely thrilled with this new Pope.
Oh yes, isn't he wonderful?
I'm still very skeptical of the Catholic Church. However, this move toward conversations about economic justice and addressing inequality and talking about care and compassion, I think that that's incredibly exciting. If we can get our politicians to listen, I think it'll even be better.
Well, you recently had a group of people camped out in the back of the church.
We did.
Very I walked by and saw it when I was walking my son's dog, and I thought, wow, these people are all in merriment, and apparently they stayed for a very long time.
They were there for a little over a week. It was the Carnival de Resistance, and they
Oh,
used
yes,
art
Harrisonburg
and
recently. They're
art
wonderful.
and
Yes.
installations to talk about the divine and our relationship.
I thought that was really amazing that they were all camped out in the back of your church. It
Yeah.
was so incredible because they had all their campers and things like that. So talk about a relationship, and you all have your services or your meetings, firesides, whatever they are, in people's homes.
In people's homes.
And so
Yes.
it seems like you all are doing the same kinds of things,
We're also trying to make sure that we use technology in really smart ways so that we get as many people together on Sunday morning or for our midweek Wednesday worship, but that the people who can't come have the audio to listen to or have the website to look at to see what was talked about. We recently invested in getting music rights so that we can broadcast the entire service. And we also are beginning to look at how using projection inside the sanctuary can aid people who might not be able to participate in other ways. So technology is a tool, and we can use it in creative, intelligent ways.
That sounds terrific.
And I think
That's absolutely terrific.
Creativity is the word. I think the very best thing we could do for religion is to call ourselves religious and to explain to people in our relationships why we are. Why do we value that? What does it bring to our lives? Does it bring us justice? Does it bring us closer? Does it heal these ills? As I alluded before, I personally believe that we are seeing the so-called destruction of religion so it can be renewed. I love that word, renewal. I believe that we are readying for a change because culture is changing, people are changing, women are emerging from the dark.
So do you
Everything is
think there's a
changing.
place for rituals?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I wanted to add also another trend in religious groups is having smaller groups within the larger group so that people are creating family-like groups. Our Chabara, which means
nice.
friendship group or fellowship group, which meets every second and fourth Saturday, is a fairly intimate group. And it's grown, and it still has remained quite intimate. I think that really helps a lot. But when it comes to ritual, what I want to say is I learned an interesting thing about ritual versus ceremony. Ceremony, and I don't know if this is, everybody holds this, but a ceremony celebrates something. For example, we've just finished celebrating Hanukkah, and it's a ceremony to light the candles. Nothing happens as a result of lighting the candles. We're commemorating something that happened in the past. A ritual brings change. When people go to the church or go under a marriage canopy, unmarried, and they come out married, that's a ritual because something has changed. And ritual is incredibly important because there are times in our lives when there's great change occurs. One of the common rituals that really I think is worth celebrating in a religious way is getting a driver's license. Getting a driver's license represents a major shift in a person's life. And I think, and for young women when they begin to menstruate, that has, those things are becoming more, at least, I don't know if it's happening in other faiths, but in the Jewish faith, rituals are being developed for those kinds of things.
I think one of the most significant things that we've lost in our past in terms of letting go of religion is all the rites of passage. Those were the traditions of things. And I used to celebrate the child's first tooth, menstruation, all those things in our family because our culture and our, didn't celebrate those things anymore. And I think it's really important and a thing to celebrate with, to know. It seems like we've extended childhood beyond college years, because we don't really celebrate the passages of one transition to the next. And I think that's something that, I'm hoping will come back to our daily lives.
I think that ritual is often when people realize they have to get themselves back into a religious community. Maybe they have their first child and realize they want a baptism or a rite of passage. Maybe they lose a family member and know that they need a memorial service. And I know that many of your viewers who are watching this today might be wondering what they can do with the information that they've heard. And I want to encourage anybody who's listening to know that sometimes when they're ready to go join a religious group, that can be the scariest part. Looking on the website, where is the address? Parking the car, walking in the door. Is there going to be anybody there who's like me? And getting over that is so rewarding. So I just want to encourage anybody who's been trying to get up the guts to go visit a house of faith to do it and to trust that once you get in the door, you're going to find some welcoming faces and people who've been on a journey very similar.
Well, we've been talking about uplifting a nation out of spiritual bankruptcy today on What Wise Women Want. And our guests today have been Melanie Miller, pastor of Sojourners United Church of Christ, Kevyn Byrne of the Baha'i Faith, Alex McGee, Unitarian Universalist Church Ministerial Associate, and Heena Reiter, Jewish Renewal Community of Charlottesville and the Interfaith Cooperative Circle. So, ladies, in about 10 seconds, each one of you, would you like to sum up and go around? 10 seconds.
This has been such a pleasure being here. Thank you so much. And as I said earlier, I really do have hope. And at Sojourners, we're all about welcoming people in, making the circle bigger, but mostly about working for justice and really finding people who live on the margins and welcoming them in, sharing their stories and giving them a place.
Kevyn?
Yeah, I too thank you for inviting me here today, and also feel very hopeful for all of our religions in bringing us to an ultimate peace.
Alex?
I'm glad to have been here, and I hope that folks who want to try out the Unitarian Universalist community will come on over.
Heena?
This has been amazing, and I want to join each one of your religions part-time, and I love interfaith, and I welcome any opportunity to reconnect like this.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll return again. If you'd like to learn more about what Wise Women Want, please go to our website, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Go to our website to find out what we'll be talking about next, and thank you. Have a good evening.